Can't think of anything quippy. Let's just get into the review. I thought about different things to try to open this review with, and nothing was coming to me for whatever reason, so I just gonna go ahead and dive right into this. I recently watched a screener of the upcoming Johnny Depp and Maïwenn film called Jeanne du Barry, and it's about the last mistress of King Louis XV. I only had a vague knowledge of her based primarily off of some type of episode I saw, some type of like history-oriented episode I saw that Ryan and Shane from BuzzFeed had put together, and it was something about a necklace and whatever. So when this movie came up and I looked into it to like see what it's about, I realized, oh, it's about this lady. So I have very mixed feelings about this movie because it didn't really win me over in the beginning, because I felt like the narrative that we were given in the first part of the movie, and this is directed by Maïwenn, who also plays the role of Jeanne du Barry in here, but in the beginning it felt a bit clunky. The narrative and the pacing, it didn't flow very, very well for me. And a lot of the exposition about what was going on in her life was done through voiceover. And I feel like there was quite a bit of time compression that went on in this film. Now, she wasn't his mistress for forever, maybe for just, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years, something like that. He passed away of smallpox. Not a spoiler, you guys. I mean, this is part of history. After that, she left Versailles. Her story is interesting in that she was not your typical chief mistress. This movie blew my mind, y'all. Okay, she came from low birth, she was a prostitute, and then she became the chief mistress, the chief royal mistress of King Louis XV. And a lot of people at court, which court is a whole weird thing unto itself, they didn't like her because she didn't fit in because she was of low birth. I had trouble just kind of wrapping my mind around the whole concept of a chief royal mistress, and that it was an actual title, and that aristocratic ladies held this title generally, and that Jeanne du Barry was so groundbreaking because she wasn't aristocratic. And I mean, basically these women were just like super rich prostitutes. I mean, that's ultimately what it was. So what did it matter if she came from low birth or high birth? Whatever. It was a thing. It was really weird. The whole stuff about the court and the way the king had to be treated, walking backwards with many steps, it was hilarious, you guys. It was really funny to watch it play out. I just couldn't. The cultural stuff that was going, like, I guess it's just a thing with, monarchs and people in the royal family and the court and all this silly, stuffy, arrogant type of thing that goes on in these atmospheres. It's just, anyway, I couldn't figure out if this was a comedy or a drama. I'm kind of being a little bit unkind. I did not hate this movie. Once she meets the king, I felt like the flow of the story was much better than it had been up to that point, where there was a lot of time jumping going on, and the flow just didn't, to me, it just wasn't handled very well. And then once they met, the story of their relationship was the bulk of this movie, in addition to the political stuff that was going on because of her presence. I didn't realize there was a whole thing with Marie Antoinette and this rivalry, and how important it was that Marie Antoinette not speak to her or speak to her depending on who you're talking with, and how it could potentially cause these issues between France and Austria because Marie Antoinette was shunning her. It was just, it was fascinating, and yet at the same time, it was just mind-boggling, because this is like a totally foreign world to me, to most people probably, and it was interesting to see Johnny Depp in this role. Now, this is from what I understand, this is his first role since the trial. And I didn't realize until I saw who made the movie, who was starring in the movie beside him. I didn't realize that this was going to be in French, and it's in French. Now, I knew Johnny Depp could speak French. From what I understand, he has a really good grasp of the accent, but his actual vocabulary and ability to speak it, I guess, off the top of his head is not very strong. I can identify with that pretty well. I know exactly what that feels like for him. So obviously in this movie, he has a script, and to me, he did just fine. His performance was good. His dialogue, I felt, was handled pretty well. This is not a movie about him. This is primarily a movie about her. There is a lot of them together, and so you see the course of their relationship from the time they are introduced to the time that he dies and she has to flee Versailles. And it was crazy to me, the whole thing about how it was arranged, them being able to be officially together and her have the title of chief royal mistress, and stuff that was done to try to make this happen. And something else that blew my mind was when he first set his eyes on her, he wanted her to come to him and she had to undergo this examination first. And it was just like, this is so surreal. And then before that, when it was indicated because I think she was like in some relationship with some guy, and the king wanted her to come to him, and everybody in the household where she was, it was like this wonderful, great honor. This was just so lovely that she was going to go off to have sex with the king. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful, great privilege. It's like, this is so, and she was paid for, just like, it was so, I don't know, it was so crazy to me. I mean, I know this stuff was a thing, but to see it play out in this movie was just, it was fascinating, I must say. I do think that if you're a fan of Johnny Depp, if you're a fan of historical dramas, you will probably be interested in this. There were certainly some moving moments in here. It shows different events in her life and how they affected her. I am not sure how much of this was actually real, how much had been dramatized. I do know that a great deal of this was actually real, but I'm not sure if some characters were like amalgamations of multiple people just to help with the flow of the narrative. And I'm also not sure if there are some people in this movie that never even existed at all. There was at least one person that I could not find confirmation of them existing, but there was an interesting video that I saw just before I started filming this very rambly review, because my thoughts about this film are all over the place. I found it fascinating and just like mind-boggling at the same time, which is just this weird combination. But anyway, I was watching a video about her before I started filming this review, and I'm going to try to remember to put a link to it in the description of this video in case you're interested to get just a more kind of full-on breakdown of her life from start to the end. It's an interesting listen, and a lot of the stuff that she was talking about in this video do mirror what is represented in this film. So I'm curious to find out eventually when this movie is released on the big screen, which I think is going to be shortly. I'm curious to see if there will be videos that go through the fact versus fiction of this, just because it's an interesting story, even though it's a very strange story. I mean, the stuff that was happening in here is not necessarily anything, new, being thrown around like it's nothing, being bought and sold and all this kind of stuff. But it was just wild to see it happening the way it did in this film. But also, just to let you know as well, all of that stuff is just stuff that you are aware of. It's not that it necessarily shows anything. There's no graphic representation of any of that. It's just basically telling you this story about this girl and her relationship with the king. I felt like Maïwenn did whatever, I'm gonna call her Maïwenn. I felt like Maïwenn did a really good job in the role, and you could tell this was a labor of love for her. From what I understand, it's not being received with the greatest of praise, and I'm not exactly sure why. I don't know how much of it is just because of the things that I've already touched upon, the pacing at the beginning, the way the narrative flowed at the beginning, or if there's something that I'm not quite getting. I don't know if it has anything to do with Johnny Depp, and maybe there's certain groups that still kind of want to be negative about him, or if it's the subject matter, or if it really is the direction as a whole. This was certainly not the worst film I've ever seen. There were aspects about it that I did really appreciate. I did like the acting. There was a character in here, I cannot remember his name. He was kind of like the king's, you know, right-hand man or whatever. He sort of guided her along this process. He would tell her, you know, you have to do this and you have to do that. He taught her sort of the ways of the court and how to be around the king. And he became a good friend to her. I do not know if this guy is a real person. This is one of the people I'm not sure of if they're a real person, but I liked the dynamic between those two characters. I also liked just seeing the historical aspect of the stuff that was going on, and seeing Marie Antoinette and the guy who was going to become King Louis the 16th, the grandson of Louis the 15th. Also, things that happened when Louis the 15th was coming to the end of his life, and little interesting things to let the public know what was happening with him, like a candle being lit outside his room so they knew. I guess this meant, I mean, this was cultural stuff that I wasn't exactly tuned into, but I'm assuming this meant the king is dying, and then when he passes, there's the blowing out of the flame and things like that. Those moments in the film, the reaction of the public, and then like the final moments between Jeanne du Barry and King Louis, quite touching. And these things were positives for me. Any negatives are just the things I've already mentioned, and also that character dramas aren't necessarily my favorite genre. The primary reason that I wanted to see this was because of Johnny Depp. And I am glad I watched it. I don't consider it a waste of my time. I would recommend it if this is the type of thing you are interested in. So anyway, I guess that's about it. Believe it or not, I did have notes that I was going by, but it's been a few days since I've seen this film, so it's not entirely super fresh, but at the same time, my thoughts about it are still quite muddled because it's a little hard to put into words how I felt about it. Yet at the same time, it is something that has stuck with me ever since I've seen it. And I think it's just primarily the whole situation was just so unique to me. And also the story of her life, a bit interesting, and what happened to her at the end of her life. They do not go into this explicitly. It's basically once the king dies and she leaves Versailles, they kind of wrap up the story with a bit of voiceover exposition. Really, the main focus of this film is her time with the king. There's a little bit of stuff before just to show you kind of her backstory as she was coming up before she met the king. And then the rest of it is just her time with the king and the things that she experienced at court and the different ways she was treated. And it was like watching a soap opera. I swear. Okay, well, I don't have anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and shut up while I'm ahead, if I was ever even ahead on this review. All right, you guys, if you end up watching it, let me know what you think. If you have any in-depth knowledge of the history of these people and you watch this movie, let me know how it compares to real life. I'm sure there were some things that were dramatized, exaggerated, absolutely factually incorrect, whatever. I just don't exactly know yet what those things were. Okay, that's it for this one. Nos vemos. What are you doing, Chip?